Here's something that's going to sound completely backwards at first. The men who struggle most with women aren't the quiet ones. They're the talkative ones. The ones who fill every silence, over-explain every joke, and treat conversation like a performance they're desperately trying to win. And somewhere along the way, most men were taught the exact opposite. Be more interesting, have more to say, keep the energy up at all costs. That advice isn't just wrong, it's actively working against them. Think about the last time you watched someone talk just a little too much. Maybe it was a first date. Maybe it was a work meeting. Doesn't matter. It didn't feel confident. It felt like watching someone perform for approval in real time. And everyone in the room could feel it, even if nobody said it out loud. Women in particular tend to pick up on that energy instantly, long before a single word gets analyzed. Overtalking isn't charm, it's anxiety, wearing a conversational disguise. What's coming in this video is a mindset shift that changes this completely. The exact reason silence, when it comes from the right place, reads as power instead of awkwardness. Not silence as a trick, not silence as some kind of manufactured mystery. Real internal security that simply doesn't need to fill every gap in a conversation to feel okay. Once this clicks, the entire dynamic of how a man is perceived starts to shift, and it happens without changing a single thing about what he looks like or what he says. Before diving in, here's something worth doing right now. Think about the last conversation where nervous energy took over, where words kept coming just to avoid an uncomfortable pause. Drop that moment in the comments below. Naming it is where this actually starts to change. And if this kind of depth, the psychology underneath attraction, rather than surface-level tricks, is something worth having more of, hit subscribe and like this video before getting into it, because everything from here forward builds on exactly this. Most men think silence is something to survive, not something to use. They treat every pause in a conversation like a fire that needs to be put out immediately, filling it with words, jokes, half-finished thoughts, anything to make the discomfort go away. But here's the part nobody tells them. That urge to fill space isn't charm, and it isn't friendliness either. It's nervous energy looking for an exit. And women, whether they can name it or not, feel that difference instantly. Think about the last time someone kept talking just a little too much around you. Maybe they over-explained a joke or kept adding details nobody asked for. It didn't come across as interesting. It came across as someone trying too hard to be liked. That's the trap. When a man talks to manage his own anxiety instead of talking because he actually has something worth saying, the words stop being communication and start being a performance for approval. And performances, no matter how polished, rarely feel attractive up close. This is where understanding a bit of attraction psychology changes everything. A comfortable silence sends a completely different signal than a nervous ramble. Silence says calmly, "I don't need to perform right now." A rushed sentence, filling dead air just to avoid the discomfort of quiet, says the opposite. "I need you to like me right now, in this exact moment." One man radiates ease, the other radiates a need for validation. And if there's one thing that consistently shows up in signs of attraction, it's that people are drawn toward ease, not toward neediness. Here's a practical way to notice this in real life. Next time there's a lull in a conversation, resist the instinct to speak for 3 full seconds. Just 3. It will feel like an eternity the first few times, but that small window is where a man either proves he's comfortable in his own skin or reveals that he isn't. This isn't about becoming quiet and distant. It's about learning to let a pause exist without rushing to rescue it. Reading women's body language during that pause, actually, tends to teach a man more than any amount of talking ever could. There's a reason mentors and men who've genuinely done the inner work keep coming back to the same idea. Composure under silence isn't a trick. It's a byproduct of something deeper. It's not learned by memorizing lines or studying female body language signals like a checklist. It's built the same way any form of quiet confidence is built, through repeated moments of choosing not to fill the gap out of fear. And once a man tastes what it feels like to sit in silence without flinching, something interesting starts to happen to the way people respond to him. There's a specific moment that tends to separate men who understand attraction psychology from men who are still guessing. It happens when she teases him, or goes quiet for a second, or leaves an obvious opening in the conversation. One of those little silences designed, whether consciously or not, to see what he does with it. Most men rush to fill it. They over-explain. They defend a comment nobody attacked. They laugh a little too fast just to keep things moving. And in that rush, something valuable quietly slips away. What slips away is composure. When a man resists the urge to fill an intentional silence, he's not being cold or standoffish. He's demonstrating something women's body language often responds to before words even come into play. Stability. Think of it like a table with 4 solid legs. It doesn't wobble just because someone leans on it. A man who stays steady when teased, who doesn't scramble to explain himself, is showing that his sense of self isn't something that needs constant defending. Here's a real-world example of this in action. Picture a man being gently teased about something small, maybe his taste in movies, or the fact that he showed up 5 minutes late. The anxious response is immediate justification, a string of reasons, excuses, or nervous laughter meant to smooth things over. The grounded response is almost the opposite. A slight smile, maybe a single calm reply, and then nothing. No scrambling. That silence after the tease often says more than any comeback ever could. And it's one of the clearer signs of attraction a man can create without saying a word. This is worth practicing deliberately, not just waiting for it to happen naturally. A good exercise: the next time someone teases you or pokes fun in a lighthearted way, count to 2 before responding at all. Not to be dramatic, just to break the automatic reflex to defend. Athletes do something similar under pressure. They call it staying centered, not reacting to every stimulus the moment it arrives. Reading women's body language in these small windows, the slight lean in, the raised eyebrow waiting to see what he'll do, teaches a man far more about how to read women than any script or line ever will. The man who doesn't chase the silence becomes, almost without trying, the calm center of the interaction. Everyone else in the exchange starts orbiting around his steadiness instead of the other way around. And once that shift happens, even briefly, it becomes something a man wants to feel again, which raises a natural question. If staying quiet under pressure builds this kind of stability, what happens when that same silence is used on purpose? Not just as a reaction, but as a tool. There's a quiet but important distinction most men never learn to make. And it's the difference between talking to prove value and talking because something is actually worth saying. The first kind of talking comes from a hidden question running underneath every sentence. Do you see that I'm interesting? Do you see that I'm worth your time? The second kind doesn't ask anything at all. It simply says what needs to be said, and then it stops. That stopping is where quiet confidence lives. Most self-improvement advice gets this backwards. It tells men to be funnier, sharper, quicker with a comeback, as if attraction were some kind of stand-up performance to win. But dating advice for men that actually holds up over time tends to point the other direction. Grounded, secure men aren't the ones with the most rehearsed lines. They're the ones whose words carry weight precisely because they don't use very many of them. A short sentence, said with ease, lands heavier than a paragraph said with nerves underneath it. Here's an analogy worth holding on to. Think of a man who speaks like he's paying for every word out of his own pocket. He's not stingy or withholding, he just doesn't waste anything. Compare that to a man who talks like words are free and unlimited, filling every gap because silence makes him uncomfortable. Female body language signals tend to shift noticeably between the two. With the first man, there's curiosity, engagement, a kind of leaning in. With the second, there's often a subtle pulling back, even if she can't quite explain why. This doesn't mean forcing yourself to be silent or robotic. That swings too far the other way and reads as detached. The goal is intentionality. Before speaking, there's a simple internal check worth practicing. Am I about to say this because it adds something, or because I'm uncomfortable with the quiet? That 1-second pause before responding, almost invisible to anyone watching, is often the exact moment where restraint gets built. Over time, this becomes less of a technique and more of a default setting. The same way an experienced driver doesn't think about braking. The body just knows. What makes this authentic rather than cold or manipulative is that it isn't performed. It's not a technique pulled out during a date and dropped afterward. It comes from a man who is simply comfortable enough with quiet that restraint feels natural instead of forced. And once that comfort is real, something shifts in how a man is perceived, not as someone playing games, but as someone who simply doesn't need to. Which brings up an interesting question. If restraint builds this kind of magnetism, what happens to everything left unsaid? There's a strange thing that happens in the human mind whenever information is incomplete. It doesn't shut down, it leans in. Gives someone the full picture, every detail explained, every thought narrated out loud, and curiosity has nothing left to do. But leave a gap, a sentence trailing off, a thought only half shared, and the mind can't help but start filling it in on its own. This is one of the most overlooked pieces of attraction psychology, and it's almost entirely about what a man doesn't say. Most men do the opposite instinctively. They over-explain their jokes, narrate their intentions, clarify what they meant 5 different ways just to make sure nothing gets misunderstood. It feels considerate, even responsible, but in practice it hands over every piece of the puzzle before the other person even gets a chance to wonder. There's a phrase worth remembering here. Explaining is often just another form of over-talking, wearing a more polite disguise. Here's a practical shift to try. Next time you're asked something personal, like what you did over the weekend or what you're thinking about, answer with less than feels natural. Not vague to the point of being evasive, just incomplete. Something like a short answer with a slight trail off instead of the full play-by-play. This isn't about being closed off or playing hard to get, it's about leaving room. Reading body language in these moments tends to reveal something interesting. A slight pause, a follow-up question, a flicker of genuine curiosity that fuller explanations rarely produce. Think of a good book or a well-made film. The ones that stay in someone's mind aren't always the ones that explain everything in the final act. Often, it's the ones that leave a thread slightly open, that trust the audience to sit with a question rather than hand them a tidy resolution. A man who speaks the same way, sharing enough to be genuine, but not so much that there's nothing left to discover, creates that same effect in conversation. She starts wondering what he's actually thinking underneath what he said, and that wondering is where engagement lives. This isn't manipulation, and it isn't a formula for being mysterious on command. It's simply the natural result of a man who doesn't feel the need to narrate every internal thought just to be understood. He shares what matters and lets the rest exist quietly, unspoken. And when that becomes second nature rather than a tactic, something else starts to happen underneath the surface. Something tied less to charm and more to a sense of direction that doesn't need an audience to feel real. There's a version of confidence that gets faked all the time, and there's a version that can't be faked no matter how hard someone tries. The faked kind depends entirely on how the other person is reacting in the moment, a nervous performance dressed up as ease. The real kind comes from somewhere else entirely. A man who has direction in his own life, goals he's actually working toward, standards he holds regardless of who's watching. That kind of man isn't performing for validation, because his sense of worth was never up for a vote in the first place. This matters more than it seems on the surface. A man without direction often looks to conversations, to reactions, to whether she's laughing or leaning in, as the only source of feedback about his own value. Every silence becomes a small threat, a question mark hanging in the air asking, "Am I doing okay?" But a man building something real, whether that's a career, a skill, a body, a purpose bigger than any single interaction, carries an internal reference point that doesn't disappear the moment a room goes quiet. Here's where this becomes practical rather than just philosophical. If a man wants to naturally need less validation from conversations, the fastest path isn't studying more conversation techniques. It's building something outside the conversation entirely, training consistently, working toward a skill that takes months, not minutes, reading something that stretches the mind. Biographies of people who built things against resistance tend to work well here. Stories of men who kept moving without applause. The byproduct of that kind of building is a silence that doesn't feel empty, because his attention isn't fully hooked on her reaction to begin with. This is one of the more counterintuitive pieces of dating advice for men, the kind that doesn't get repeated enough. The silence itself doesn't need to be filled because it was never his job to entertain in the first place. He's not being rude or distant. He's simply unattached to whether the moment goes exactly as planned. There's a certain magnetism in that unattachment. A woman reading female body language signals in a man like this often notices something steady underneath, a kind of gravity that doesn't ask to be noticed. Without saying a single word about it, this communicates something most men spend years trying to say directly and failing. I don't need to convince you of anything. No speech required, no persuasion, just presence. And once that internal shift actually happens, once purpose starts doing the quiet work that nervous talking used to do, a new question naturally comes up, because too much of a good thing can tip in the wrong direction just as easily as too little. Here's the part most men get wrong once they finally start understanding the power of silence. They swing too far in the other direction. They go from over-talking to barely speaking at all, mistaking coldness for confidence. And that mistake is just as costly as the first one. Too little talking doesn't read as mysterious or grounded. It reads as disinterest, or worse, as someone who simply isn't emotionally available. Reading women's body language in these moments usually reveals withdrawal, not attraction, arms crossing slightly tighter, eye contact dropping, energy pulling back instead of leaning in. This is where a lot of dating advice for men fails, because it treats silence like a single lever. More silence equals more attraction. That's not how it works. There's a real balance to strike, and it lives somewhere between two extremes. On one side, the anxious talker, filling every gap out of nervous energy. On the other, the man who's gone silent as a kind of armor, hiding behind restraint because he's afraid of saying the wrong thing. Neither version is actually secure. Both are still reacting to fear, just in opposite directions. Think of it like a campfire on a cold night. Too far away and there's no warmth at all, just distance and cold air. Too close and it becomes overwhelming, even uncomfortable. The right distance is what makes people want to sit down and stay a while. That's the balance worth aiming for here. Brief, intentional words paired with a relaxed presence. Not a man who says nothing and not a man who says everything, but a man who speaks when it matters and stays easy the rest of the time. Here's a practical way to find that middle ground. In conversation, aim to speak with purpose about a third of the time, and let the other 2/3 be genuine listening, real reactions, comfortable presence without pressure to constantly contribute. This isn't a rigid math formula, it's a mental anchor. Attraction psychology consistently points to this same pattern. People are drawn to warmth paired with strength, not warmth alone, and definitely not strength alone. One without the other tends to fall flat. This rare middle ground, warm enough to feel safe, strong enough to feel steady, is something most men never actually find, mostly because nobody ever explains it this clearly. They either overcorrect into silence or spiral back into nervous talking the moment things feel uncertain. But once a man locates that exact balance, brief words, relaxed presence, real attention, something clicks that no amount of clever lines could ever replicate. By now, something should be clicking into place, something that most men never get told directly. Saying less was never about being mysterious on purpose. It was never a trick pulled out to seem intriguing or a script memorized to sound calm under pressure. What's actually being built here runs deeper than any conversation tactic. It's internal security, the kind that doesn't need constant approval to feel steady. The silence isn't the goal. It's simply what security looks like from the outside. This is worth sitting with for a second because it changes the entire approach. A man chasing how to be quieter or how to seem more mysterious is still performing, still managing an image for someone else's benefit. But a man who's actually done the internal work, who has direction, restraint, and comfort with stillness, doesn't need to manage anything. The silence shows up naturally because there's nothing anxious underneath it, needing to escape through words anymore. So here's a real question worth answering honestly, not just scrolling past. Where does this show up the most right now? Is it in first conversations, rushing to fill every gap? Is it in texting, sending 3 messages before waiting for one reply? Naming the exact moment where the nervous talking tends to leak out is the first real step toward changing it, because awareness always comes before control. Drop that moment down in the comments below, the specific situation where silence feels hardest to hold. This kind of internal shift doesn't happen by accident, and it definitely doesn't happen by watching one video and moving on with the same habits intact. It happens through repetition, through catching that reflex to fill silence and choosing deliberately not to. It happens through building something outside of conversations entirely, purpose, direction, standards, so that presence stops depending on anyone else's reaction. That's the real work most men skip, because it's slower and less flashy than memorizing a few clever lines. If any of this actually landed, if something in here explained a pattern that's been playing out without a name for it until now, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because this channel is built entirely around this kind of depth, the psychology underneath attraction, not surface-level tricks. And this connects directly into something worth exploring next. How does a man actually know when his silence is working, drawing her in, versus when it's quietly being read as disinterest and pushing her away?